What is context? Before you learned to read, did you ever wonder how anyone could read those random scribbles on a page? It took a lot of practice, but eventually you were able to read too. As you continue to get older, you will likely read books that get more difficult, with words you've never seen before. And if there isn't someone around to help you understand what those words mean, there's still a way to try and figure it out on your own. The word context might be one of those words that you aren't familiar with yet. So, what is context? Context is the words around an unknown word that help us understand the meaning of that unknown word. Context can also help us understand what is happening in a sentence or paragraph. To better explain what context is, let's look at an example of how context works. If you have a hard time figuring out the meaning of a word you haven't heard before, someone might use it in a sentence, or use other words that are like that word to help you understand the unknown word's meaning. For example, if you didn't know what the word exhausted meant, but it was in a sentence that read, "I was extremely tired from staying up all night working, and now I feel exhausted." The other words in that sentence are the explanation or context for what the word exhausted means. In this sentence, the words tired and staying up all night help us understand that the word exhausted is just another way of saying tired. Imagine an alien from another planet is sitting at your dinner table. The alien says to you,
"On my planet, we like to dip our ozus into milk, just like you do."
The alien is able to speak English, but he uses an alien word, ozus. Based on how it was used in the sentence, could you guess what the word means? If you said cookies, that's a good guess. You probably looked at the other words in the sentence to figure out what ozus meant. You looked at the context of the sentence, and you used that context to find clues to help you understand the meaning of a word you'd never heard before. Looking at the other words in a sentence to discover the meaning of a new word is called looking for context clues. Now, let's use context clues to help us figure out the meaning of one of the words in this sentence. The boring speech was monotonous and as dull as ever, and I fell asleep listening to it. The word monotonous in that sentence is quite a big word. It might feel overwhelming for you to try and define it. Let's use the context clues in the sentences to see if it helps. The boring speech was monotonous and as dull as ever, and I fell asleep listening to it. So, looking at that sentence, what kind of speech was it? Was it exciting? Was it interesting? Or was it boring? It was boring, wasn't it? So the word boring is a clue to what the word monotonous could mean. Let's keep reading that sentence and see if we can find some more context clues. The sentence also says the speech was as dull as ever. The word dull means that something isn't interesting. So, we know the speech is boring and not interesting. In fact, it is so boring and uninteresting that the person listening to it fell asleep. So, if the speech is boring and dull, then monotonous is probably another word that means boring or dull. And in fact, monotonous means that something is tedious and repetitious and doesn't have very much variety or interest. Or in other words, it is dull or boring. Have you ever heard someone's voice described as monotone? That word comes from the word monotonous. It means there is no variation in their voice, and it feels very boring. Their voice might sound like this. Would that be boring to listen to? Great job using context clues to figure out the meaning of the word monotonous. Let's use context clues again to see if we can discover the meaning of another word you might not know. Let's read this sentence together. There was a pedestrian standing in the middle of the crosswalk who was almost hit by a car. Let's try and figure out what the word pedestrian means by looking for some context clues in that sentence. What is the pedestrian doing? Standing in the middle of the crosswalk, right? So we know that a pedestrian stands and that they were in a crosswalk. So, who would normally stand or walk in a crosswalk? Does a tree? What about a house? Not really, right? But do people? Yes. And the end of our sentence says that the pedestrian was almost hit by a car. Does that seem like a pedestrian could be a person? It does, doesn't it? And in fact, a pedestrian is a person who is walking along the road or sidewalk. Well, guess what? You probably have been a pedestrian many times. When we tried to figure out the words monotonous and pedestrian, we looked for clues in the sentences to help us. Remember that those clues are called context clues. Nearly everything you read includes context clues, which help you know the meaning of an unknown word or passage. Context clues also help build your vocabulary. Like today, you learned the meaning of two new words, monotonous and pedestrian. Context clues also help you to be able to read more difficult books and other material. When you come across a word you don't understand, here are 4 types of context clues to help you figure out the word's meaning. Number 1, definition or rewording. This is when the meaning of an unknown word is explained right after that word. Like in this sentence, Jennifer received acclaim, praise for her work, at the art show tonight. The word acclaim was followed by the words praise for her work, which is actually the definition of the word acclaim. Sometimes the definition of an unknown word is given in the context of a sentence. Number 2, synonym or similar. This is when 2 words that mean the same thing are used in a sentence to help clarify meaning. Like in this sentence, the cunning man was so sneaky, no one saw him slip past the line onto the ride. A synonym or similar word for cunning is sneaky. Sometimes 2 similar words are used in the context of a sentence and can help you figure out the meaning of an unknown word. Number 3, antonym or opposite. This is when an opposite definition of a word is used in a sentence. Here's an example. The man was usually candid with his employee, but today he lied to her. What do you think the word candid means if the word lied means the opposite of candid? The opposite of lying would be telling the truth. So the word candid must mean honest. That sentence is saying that usually the man was honest with his employee, but today he lied to her. Words that are the opposite of an unknown word can help us understand an unknown word's meaning. Number 4, logic. Sometimes you can use logic or common sense to discover the meaning of a word. Like in this example, the balloon ascended into the air as it moved higher into the clouds. What does the word ascended mean? There are a couple of clues. First, we know the balloon is moving higher into the clouds. And second, we already know that balloons float. It sure sounds like the balloon is going up into the air, right? So the word ascend must mean to rise. Now, try using one more of these 4 steps and see if you can figure out what the word sluggish means in this next sentence. After the boy returned home from the game so late, he felt very sluggish and went directly to bed. Did the boy get home from the game early or late? He got home late, right? He felt sluggish, so he went directly to bed. If it was late and he went right to bed, what do you think sluggish could mean? Well, how do you feel when it's really late and you just want to go to bed? Did you say tired? If you did, then you just defined the word sluggish all on your own. Great job! If you're still unable to understand the meaning of a word after looking at the context clues, you can always use a dictionary or ask someone to help you. But if no one is around, using context clues is a great way to discover the meaning of new words.
Hope you had fun learning with us. Visit us at learnbright.org for thousands of free resources and turnkey solutions for teachers and homeschoolers.